A man may not tell you with words that he is falling in love with you, but he will return to the space where he feels the most peace. And often that space is your presence. In a world filled with noise, many relationships fall apart not because of what is said, but because of what is not felt. Love is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers through actions, lingers in moments of silence, or reveals itself in how someone chooses to stay, even when there's nothing to gain. There is a quiet way a man begins to love, and it often happens beneath the surface, like seeds planted in darkness before the bloom. Yet many women don't see it, not because it isn't there, but because they've been taught to look for the wrong signs. They're waiting for words, for grand gestures, for reassurance. And in that waiting, they miss the sacred truth. A man doesn't fall in love when he's impressed. He falls in love when he's safe. Safe to feel, safe to be seen, safe to not always know what to say. So today, let's slow down and explore what most never pause to notice. Why men truly fall in love, and why most women never recognize the moment when it begins. This is not a conversation about techniques or manipulation. It is a journey into the unseen energies that shape relationships, a journey into your awareness, into your presence, into what it means to see a man, not just with your eyes, but with your understanding. If you're new here, welcome to Self-Mastery, where we share timeless wisdom to help you protect your energy, elevate your mindset, and walk in purpose. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a message that speaks to your soul, strengthens your spirit, that could shift your entire path. Let us begin. There is a silent truth about how love forms in the heart of a man. It rarely enters with noise or spectacle. Instead, it seeps in through the unnoticed spaces. A moment of stillness in your presence, a gesture of understanding when he least expects it, the absence of judgment when he reveals a flaw. While much of society emphasizes what a man sees when he looks at a woman, it is far more profound to ask what he as feel see when he is around her. This is the doorway through which love enters. A doorway not built with beauty or words, but with emotional safety. Emotional safety is not something you can demand or disguise. It is not created by manipulation or performance. It is a state of being, one that flows from your own self-acceptance, your ability to listen without rushing to respond, your capacity to remain calm when others are chaotic, your willingness to see another person not as they ought to be, but as they are. When a man encounters that kind of presence, something in him softens not out of weakness, but because he senses he is no longer under threat. Most men grow up being taught to suppress vulnerability. They are encouraged to perform, to fix, to protect, but rarely to feel. Over time, they build masks of competence and control, often unaware of the emotional distance they carry, not just from others, but from themselves. So when a woman enters his world who does not demand that he be more than he is, who does not try to shape him with criticism or comparison, but simply allows him to unfold, that woman becomes unforgettable. The male brain, under stress or emotional pressure, doesn't always access verbal fluency. This is why many men struggle to articulate what they feel in the moment, not because they don't care, but because their emotional processing operates differently. Neuroscience shows that men's amygdalas and prefrontal cortices, regions associated with emotion and reasoning, are wired to react to emotional input in less vocal ways than women. It is in this difference that miscommunication often grows. A man may deeply feel something but lack the training or comfort to express it clearly. And yet, he remembers how he felt in your presence, how you made him feel about himself, about life, about the future. There was once a woman who ran a small tea house in Kyoto. She spoke very little, but her energy was calm, centered, without tension. Men from nearby villages would walk for hours just to sit in her garden. One traveler asked her, "Why do they come when you say so little?" She replied, "Because I do not make them leave themselves." Emotional safety is like that. It is not an act, it is a refuge. And when a man finds it in a woman, he returns, not for her words, but for her presence. A man falls in love not when he is overwhelmed, but when he is seen without being interrogated, touched without being evaluated, supported without feeling controlled. This does not mean becoming passive or silent. It means becoming conscious of the space you create with your presence. It means asking not only, "Is he giving me what I want?" but also, "Am I offering what he doesn't even know he needs?" Love grows when both questions live in the same space. This is not about walking on eggshells or suppressing your truth. Emotional safety is not silence in place of honesty. It is honesty that is not weaponized. It is the capacity to disagree without disconnection, to confront without condemnation, to reflect rather than react. Many women feel unseen in relationships, and rightly so. But often, men feel unsafe, not physically unsafe, but emotionally. Afraid that revealing too much will be used against them. Afraid that their past will be held over their head. Afraid that their silence will be misread as indifference rather than processing. In this climate of misunderstanding, emotional safety becomes a rare and sacred currency. It builds slowly, like trust, and it is most visible in the quietest moments. When he fails and you don't shame him. When he shares and you don't interrupt. When he pauses and you don't press. These are the invisible signs that a man notices. He may not say it aloud, but his nervous system will speak for him. He will be less guarded, more present. He will begin to stay longer, speak deeper, and listen more closely. These are the real beginnings of love. And yet, the journey into connection doesn't end there. For a woman to truly understand how love manifests in a man's heart, she must recognize that words are only a part of the story. The rest of it is written in silence, movement, and shared presence. Unlike women, who tend to bond and process emotions through verbal exchange, men often form emotional connections through experiences, moments of togetherness, acts of trust, and physical closeness. These are not lesser expressions of love. They are simply different languages. Imagine two people walking through a forest. One talks the entire time, sharing thoughts, dreams, and worries. The other remains quiet but attentive, pointing occasionally to a bird, a tree, or a hidden path. Both are fully engaged, both are present, but their methods of connection differ. If the first person mistakes silence for disinterest, the connection breaks. But if the silence is seen as presence, something deeper unfolds. This is the dance between the feminine need for verbal clarity and the masculine tendency toward quiet bonding. There was once a man who built wooden boats by hand. He worked silently for hours, focused, methodical. His wife at first felt ignored. "Why don't you talk to me?" she asked. He looked up and said, "I am with you. I build these boats with the same care I offer to our life." She began to sit with him, not to talk, but to share the space. Over time, their silence became a language of its own. She realized he was saying more with his hands than with his lips. This is how many men love, through quiet consistency. The problem arises when a woman expects her partner to process emotion the way she does. She may think his silence is distance, that his lack of verbal response means lack of emotional depth, but often the opposite is true. He is feeling deeply, but carefully. He is present, but cautious. Because unlike women, who are often taught to speak about feelings openly, men are conditioned to measure their words, to weigh the risk of exposure before they speak. In this space, a woman's patience becomes transformative. When a man sits beside a woman who doesn't pressure him to perform emotionally, he begins to feel safe enough to open. Not quickly and not always with eloquence, but slowly, like water shaping stone. He might share a story from his childhood or open up about a quiet fear. He might let you see him tired, unsure, or even broken. These are sacred moments, not because they are grand, but because they are rare, and they happen only in the presence of someone who can hold space without trying to fill it. This is where the wisdom of Eastern philosophy meets the science of connection. Emotional resonance doesn't always come through speech. It flows through nervous systems. When a woman is calm, grounded, and centered in herself, her presence regulates the emotional environment. Mirror neurons in the man's brain begin to sync with her stillness. His stress response softens. His heart rate steadies. His ability to feel and to trust those feelings awakens. This is not magic. It is biology, and it is one of the most powerful forms of love. It's important to remember that a man may not even realize he's falling in love during these moments, because it doesn't feel like excitement. It feels like peace. And most people are not taught to equate peace with passion. But when he begins to notice that he seeks you out, not just when he's happy, but when he's uncertain, tired, or discouraged, it's a sign. When you become the first place he wants to go and the last place he wants to leave, something foundational has taken root, and it has nothing to do with how you look or what you say. It has everything to do with how he feels when he's near you. Women often ask, why doesn't he open up to me? Or, why does he seem distant? The answer isn't always that he doesn't care. Sometimes he's trying to determine whether your presence is a place he can safely enter. He's measuring not your love, but your stillness. Not your attention, but your acceptance. Because for many men, emotional intimacy is not built on performance. It's built on permission. Permission to be flawed, to be quiet, to be himself. There is a beautiful story from ancient China of a warrior who returned from battle and fell in love with a village healer. He told her nothing of his pain, but every evening he came to sit by her fire. She never asked him to speak. She simply placed tea before him and tended her herbs. Years passed, and one day he wept in front of her, not because of fresh wounds, but because he finally felt safe enough to feel old ones. She said only this, I knew you were healing. I just waited for you to notice. This is what emotional safety looks like. Not the need to fix a man, but the strength to hold space while he restores himself. And that space is not empty. It is full of energy. Feminine energy that does not press, but invites, that does not chase, but welcomes, that does not instruct, but reflects. In that reflection, a man sees not only the woman before him, but himself more clearly. And through that clarity, he begins to love, not because he was convinced, but because he was changed. The deeper truth is this: a man does not fall in love when a woman captures his attention. He falls in love when she holds his soul without holding him back, when her presence becomes the silence between the words, the calm inside the storm, the mirror through which he discovers not just her beauty, but his own wholeness. And this is why so many women miss the moment he begins to fall, because it is not loud. It is not always romantic. It does not come with declarations or fireworks. It arrives like the breath between thoughts, like dusk turning into night, quiet, gentle, certain. And when it comes, everything changes. A man may spend his entire life mastering his environment, learning how to work with tools, lead others, build security, and keep his composure under pressure. But there is one lesson most men never fully grasp until love teaches it to them: how to feel, not how to react, not how to impress, but how to actually feel without fear or shame. And it is most often a woman's presence that becomes the silent teacher in that journey. Yet this teaching does not come from her words, her appearance, or her performance. It comes from her energy. Not the kind of energy people talk about casually, but something deeper, something ancient. The energy of a woman who is rooted in herself, emotionally clear and spiritually quiet. She does not need to control the outcome. She does not seek validation through his approval. Her power is not in how loud she speaks, but in how still she stands. Men are rarely taught emotional fluency. From a young age, boys are told to be strong, to suppress tears, to show courage, but not tenderness. This creates a disconnection, not just from others, but from their own inner life. Over time, the emotional muscles atrophy. The sensitivity does not disappear, it simply goes dormant. Then, one day, he meets someone whose calm presence bypasses the need for words. Her energy doesn't force anything. It doesn't judge. It simply allows. And in that allowance, he finds space to feel again. There's a quiet power in a woman who doesn't react from insecurity. She doesn't rush to fill the silence or fix every discomfort. Instead, she becomes the space where a man remembers what his own stillness feels like. He may not understand it at first. He may even resist it. But her energy speaks to something deeper in him. Something primal, something sacred. It says, you don't have to perform here. You can just be. And that message, even unspoken, can pierce through layers of emotional armor that words could never touch. The ancient Taoists spoke of the yin and the yang, not as opposites, but as complements. The yin, the feminine, is inward, reflective, nurturing, and receptive. The yang, the masculine, is outward, active, protective, and forward-moving. When the yin is healthy, quiet, open-balanced, it naturally draws the yang into harmony. This is not about control. It is about resonance. When a man encounters a woman whose feminine energy is not scattered by insecurity or overwhelmed by neediness, his own masculine energy begins to regulate itself. He starts to breathe differently. His thoughts slow down. He feels more at home, not just with her, but within himself. Imagine a man who spends his days in a high-pressure world, constantly having to decide, act, lead, and protect. When he comes home, he doesn't need more chaos or demands. What he longs for, but often cannot articulate, is sanctuary. Not silence in the external sense, but peace in the energetic sense. A woman who has learned how to regulate her own nervous system becomes this sanctuary. She doesn't need to correct everything. She doesn't emotionally collapse when he's distant. She doesn't interpret his silence as rejection. She understands something essential. Men don't just need love, they need peace. There is a story of a Japanese gardener who worked in a Zen monastery. Every morning, he raked the gravel in perfect lines. One day, a monk asked him why he spent so much time on something that would be disturbed by the wind. The gardener replied, "I rake to become the calm, not to change the wind." In the same way, a woman's emotional energy, when cultivated with discipline and care, is not about changing the man. It's about becoming the calm in which he begins to feel again. And the science supports this. When two people are close, physically or emotionally, their nervous systems begin to attune to each other. This phenomenon, called emotional co-regulation, means that one person's emotional state can directly influence the other's brainwave patterns, heart rate, and hormonal balance. A woman who is emotionally grounded, who breathes slowly, speaks gently, and listens fully, creates a biofeedback loop that helps a man's nervous system return to balance. He may not know why, but around her, he feels lighter, less reactive, more himself. This, more than any romantic gesture, is what makes him fall in love. But this power requires inner clarity. It requires a woman to do her own inner work, to heal the parts of her that want to fix, rescue, or convince. It means learning how to sit with her own discomfort so she doesn't project it onto the relationship. It means understanding that being emotional doesn't mean being emotionally volatile. True feminine power is not in emotional chaos. It is in emotional discipline. And that discipline becomes a guiding force for the man who is still learning how to navigate his own inner waters. There was a woman who once told her partner, "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be real, and I will meet you there." At first, he didn't know what to do with that. He was used to being criticized, told what to fix, pushed to be more. But in her quiet acceptance, he found something he had never known the freedom to unfold. Over time, he shared more. He softened. Not because she demanded it, but because her presence allowed it. Her energy was not needy. It was whole. And in that wholeness, he found the space to heal. Now consider what happens when a woman's energy is not settled, when she constantly needs reassurance, reacts from fear, or uses emotional outbursts as a form of connection. She creates a storm. And men do not fall in love with storms. They may be pulled toward the drama, but they retreat from the depth. Because love, real love, requires safety. And safety comes not from perfection, but from presence. The kind of presence that does not fluctuate based on circumstances. The kind that is earned through self-awareness and intentional stillness. This is why inner stillness is more attractive than outer beauty. Beauty fades. It changes with age, with time, with circumstance. But the way a woman holds herself, her tone, her breath, her ability to be at peace in a room, that is magnetic in a way that transcends age or appearance. It is not about how much attention she gets from the world. It is about how much stillness she can hold within herself. That stillness creates a gravitational pull. A man may not be able to explain it, but he will feel drawn to her again and again. Not because she stimulates him, but because she settles him. This kind of energy is rare, and rare things are cherished. But it is not born from luck. It is cultivated through solitude, through discipline, through choosing not to react to every external trigger, through learning how to listen, not just to others, but to one's own inner landscape. A woman who practices this becomes a mirror to a man. In her, he sees who he could be, not through pressure, but through reflection. And that reflection reaches deep into his subconscious. When he is with her, he begins to associate her presence with clarity, with calm, with emotional safety. Dopamine, the brain's reward chemical, is released not just when something exciting happens, but when we anticipate peace and pleasure in someone's presence. Over time, these associations build into attachment. The man begins to feel connected not just because she loves him, but because she restores him. This is a form of emotional imprinting. It is not manipulation. It is resonance. A man remembers how he feels around you long after he forgets what you said or how you looked. And that feeling becomes a compass. When life overwhelms him, he remembers the calm you offered. When he's unsure of himself, he remembers the steadiness of your gaze. When he feels lost, he remembers the way you didn't rush him to find answers. These memories are not stored in words. They're stored in the nervous system. But there is a paradox here. In order to offer this kind of energy to a man, a woman must first offer it to herself. She must learn how to sit in her own presence without restlessness, how to observe her own emotions without judgment, how to breathe through discomfort instead of trying to escape it. This is the work no one sees, but it is the foundation of all lasting relationships, because you can only hold space for another when you know how to hold space for yourself. There's a quiet confidence in a woman who doesn't need to prove anything. She walks into a room and doesn't demand attention. She commands it through her stillness. She doesn't beg for love. She embodies it. She doesn't ask a man to lead. She inspires him to, not through pressure, but through peace. Her inner world is so settled that others begin to settle in her presence. And this, more than appearance, more than charm, more than any strategy, this is what opens a man's heart. So much of modern advice teaches women to act, to do more, say more, push more. But in truth, men fall in love with what they feel, not just with what they see. And what they feel most deeply is not excitement, it's ease. Not drama, but depth. Not a performance, but peace. This kind of love doesn't arrive through fireworks. It builds slowly, like a sunrise. Soft, certain, irresistible. And the light that guides that sunrise is not in how loudly a woman shines. It's in how steadily she glows. When a man looks at a woman and says, "I love you," it may seem like a declaration of how he feels about her. But look deeper, and you will see something more subtle, something more foundational. Often, what he's truly expressing, whether he realizes it or not, is how he feels about Isa himself when he's around her. This is the space where real love grows, not only because of what she gives, but because of how her presence influences his sense of identity. In her presence, he either feels more confident or more insecure, more whole or more fractured, more alive or more lost. And in this internal shift, love either takes root or withers. There is a common misunderstanding in relationships. Many people believe that love is solely about the other person, that it's about how impressive, attractive, kind, or compatible someone is. But in truth, the deeper layer of attachment comes from within. A man becomes attached to a woman who awakens the best version of himself, not because she flatters him or praises him endlessly, but because her energy reflects something powerful back to him, the man he is capable of being. In psychology, this is referred to as identity-based love. It isn't shallow admiration. It's not built on convenience. It's built on resonance. The relationship becomes a mirror where a man begins to see himself in a new light. He sees strength where he once saw struggle. He sees purpose where he once felt confusion. And he begins to associate these realizations not just with internal growth, but with the woman whose presence allowed him to feel safe enough to rediscover himself. Think of a sculptor chipping away at a block of stone. From the outside, it may seem as if the statue is being created, but the sculptor will tell you the figure was always there. He just removed what was in the way. In the same way, a man doesn't fall in love because a woman builds him up from the outside. He falls in love when she helps him uncover what was already within. His strength, his focus, his integrity, his worth. She doesn't give him his value. She reflects it, and in doing so, reminds him of who he truly is. There was once a woman who lived in a small mountain village. She had a quiet presence, the kind of strength that didn't need to be loud. A man who had lost his direction came to the village, weary and burdened by life. He stayed for a few days, watching how she moved through the world, calm, focused, unbothered by praise or judgment. One day, he asked her, "Why do I feel different when I'm near you?" She smiled gently and said, "Because I do not see what is wrong with you. I see what you forgot you are." He wept, and he stayed. Not because she tried to fix him, but because she reminded him of his own foundation. Many women ask, "How do I keep a man's love?" Or, "How do I make him commit?" But the answer isn't found in external effort. It's found in how a man's identity evolves in her presence. If he becomes smaller, more doubtful, less clear, love retreats. But if he becomes stronger, more honest, more aligned, love deepens. Because for a man, the emotional anchor of love is often tied to this inner expansion. He may not express it with words, but he knows it in how he breathes differently around her, in how his decisions feel more certain, in how his purpose becomes clearer. This does not mean a woman must flatter a man or inflate his ego. Quite the opposite. The most powerful transformation occurs when a woman holds him to a higher standard. Not through criticism, but through example. Her own discipline becomes an invitation. Her clarity of mind becomes a compass. Her consistency becomes stability. And he rises, not to impress her, but to match the frequency of her presence. One of the deepest truths is that love is not sustained by pleasure. It is sustained by meaning. And meaning is what emerges when a man sees that being with her requires him to be accountable to himself. He cannot hide in distraction or performance. She does not tolerate avoidance. Not because she is controlling, but because she is conscious. She sees him, not just who he is, but who he could be. And she does not dim that vision to make him comfortable. There was a teacher who once told a young warrior, "Choose a partner who makes you more of yourself, not less." The warrior asked, "How will I know?" The teacher replied, "You will know by the silence in your mind and the strength in your chest. If your thoughts become clearer and your breath deeper, stay. If you feel like you must shrink to be loved, leave." And so the warrior waited, not for beauty or sweetness, but for alignment. When he found it, he knew, not because of passion, but because of peace. When a man is with a woman who sharpens his clarity, he feels a deeper kind of attraction. It is not always immediate, but it is enduring. She doesn't try to change him. She sees him clearly, and in doing so, she calls out the part of him that wants to grow. This is the difference between comfort and evolution. Comfort says, "I'll accept you however you come." Evolution says, "I see who you are and who you are becoming. I will walk with you, but I will not walk backward to make you feel better." Some men resist this at first. They retreat from the challenge, thinking it is too intense, too much pressure. But those who are ready, those who are sincere about becoming, are drawn in, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. A woman who challenges a man from a place of love, not ego, becomes the sacred mirror. In her reflection, he sees not his failure, but his potential. But potential must be drawn out gently. A man cannot be pushed into becoming. He must be invited. This is where wisdom is required. It is not enough to recognize what is possible in him. The key is in how that possibility is honored. If a woman nags, criticizes, or controls, he resists. But if she lives her own truth with clarity and grace, he feels the pull. Her presence becomes a silent standard, not a demand, but a demonstration. This silent standard is felt most powerfully in times of conflict. When emotions run high and old wounds surface, a woman's response becomes the measure of her maturity. If she lashes out, blames, or withdraws, she mirrors the chaos. But if she breathes, speaks slowly, and remains rooted, she becomes the anchor. In this space, a man learns that love is not about perfection. It is about presence. Her ability to remain calm in the storm teaches him that his worth is not diminished by failure. And in that teaching, he grows. It is here that love transforms into devotion. Not because of dependency, but because of alignment. A man is devoted to the space where he is reminded of his truth. He may not say it aloud, but he will return to it again and again, because that space does not just make him feel good, it makes him feel real. The foundation of this connection lies in emotional congruence. When a woman's inner world is aligned with her outer actions, her presence becomes trustworthy. He doesn't feel manipulated. He doesn't feel confused. Her yes means yes. Her no means no. She doesn't say one thing and feel another. This consistency, though simple, is incredibly rare, and it becomes a lighthouse for a man navigating through the storms of his own uncertainty. The idea that love is about how much we give or receive is incomplete. Real love, love that roots itself in the soul, emerges when we create an environment where another person becomes more of who they are. Not through pressure, not through praise, but through presence. And this presence is cultivated through a woman's own self-respect when she honors her boundaries, her values, her rhythm. She teaches without speaking. And the man, if he is open, learns without resistance. It is often said that women fall in love with how a man makes them feel, but men, more often, fall in love with how they feel about themselves in a woman's presence. This is why praise alone is not enough. Flattery may inflate his ego, but it does not touch his essence. What touches him deeply is when he feels respected, not for his achievements, but for his efforts. When she sees his intention, not just his results. When she acknowledges his inner compass, even if he hasn't yet reached his destination. There was a young man who was trying to build a business. Every day, he faced rejection and struggle. The woman he was dating often criticized him for not being successful enough. Eventually, he left. Later, he met someone else. She didn't ignore his challenges, but she respected his discipline. She admired his commitment, and in her calm support, he felt seen. Not for where he was, but for where he was going. He said to a friend, "With her, I don't feel like a failure trying to prove myself. I feel like a man already becoming who I was meant to be." That is the difference. One woman saw the present and judged. The other saw the future and believed. This does not mean overlooking flaws or enabling dysfunction. Love must be rooted in truth. But when truth is delivered with gentleness, it becomes a seed. And when that seed is watered with trust and time, it becomes transformation. A woman who wants a man to grow must first grow herself. She must live the values she wishes to see. She must be what she wants to attract. Not because this guarantees anything, but because it aligns her with authenticity. And authenticity is what makes love sustainable, not charm, not seduction, but congruence between who she is and how she loves. In the end, love is not about completion. It is about reflection. A man falls in love not just with the woman he sees, but with the man he sees himself becoming in her light. And that light is not created by performance. It is born from presence. Quiet, unshakable, true. There is a quiet disconnect that often exists between men and women, one that doesn't always appear on the surface. It doesn't show up in arguments or in grand displays of affection, but in the subtle, everyday moments where two people attempt to understand each other. A man may think he is showing love. A woman may feel completely unseen. She looks for words. He offers actions. She waits for emotional vulnerability. He provides steady presence. And in this misalignment, something precious gets lost. Not because it isn't there, but because it is missed. Women are often taught to listen for love with their ears, to wait for declarations, to seek comfort in spoken affection. They search for verbal validation, hoping to hear, "I need you," "I love you," "I choose you." And while these words are meaningful, they are not the only, or even the first, language men often use to express love. Many men are not conditioned to speak love. They are conditioned to ashto love. Their love is hidden in the unsaid, woven into moments of protection, quiet service, or consistent presence. They may never say, "I care," but they will show up when it counts. They may not verbalize their fear of losing you, but they will change their behavior so they don't have to. But if a woman does not know how to recognize this energy, she may interpret his silence as indifference. She may assume that his calm is disinterest, that his emotional restraint is apathy. And so she pushes. She asks for words. She pleads for confirmation, not realizing that in doing so, she may be stepping over the very evidence of love that he is already offering. To understand this is to cultivate a different kind of intelligence, not the kind of intellect that analyzes facts, but the kind of wisdom that reads energy. Energy never lies. It cannot be manipulated the way words can. A man may say nothing, but his energy will reveal whether he's safe, invested, connected, or distant. And yet, few women are trained to feel this. Most are trained to hear, and so they miss the truth living just beneath the surface of the moment. There is a story of a woman who was deeply in love with a quiet man. He rarely expressed himself in words. She often wondered if he truly cared, but she began to observe his patterns. He always made sure her car had fuel. He learned how she liked her tea. When she had a difficult day, he didn't offer advice. He simply made space beside her and sat silently. Eventually, she realized that his love wasn't in his mouth. It was in his presence, in his attentiveness, in the calm steadiness with which he returned to her again and again, even when words felt too small for the depth of his emotion. Energy, after all, is the oldest language in existence. Before we ever spoke, we sensed. A baby knows whether it is safe not through language, but through the heartbeat of its mother, the rhythm of her breath, the tone of her voice. That sensitivity doesn't disappear as we grow. It gets buried. Reawaken it, and you begin to see what most never notice. You begin to feel what others only analyze. You begin to recognize that love, in its most powerful form, is not loud. It is steady. When a man offers you his presence, that is not nothing. That is everything. When he stays in your life, not because it is convenient, but because it is meaningful, he is telling you something. Not with sentences, but with consistency. If you only listen for what is spoken, you will miss the truth living in the unspoken. And this is where the feminine must evolve, not to abandon the desire for verbal connection, but to expand beyond it, to develop the sensitivity to feel what words can never contain. Stillness is the gateway to this awareness. A restless mind will overlook these signals, but a woman who is grounded, present, and calm will begin to perceive the energetic patterns beneath the surface. She will notice the subtle shift in his tone. She will feel the weight in his silence. She will recognize when his energy contracts from fear or expands in trust. This is not guessing, this is attunement. And attunement is what allows real intimacy to form. Not the kind built on assumptions, but the kind anchored in truth. There was once a couple who had been together for over 30 years. People often asked them, "What's your secret?" The wife replied, "He doesn't speak much, but every morning he sharpens my knives before I cook. Every night he closes the windows before I remember. And whenever I walk into a room, he notices." That's his love. She didn't require poetry. She didn't need long conversations about feelings. She had trained herself to see what most overlook. And in that seeing, she was never unloved. This does not mean you silence your own needs, but it does mean you become wise enough to distinguish between unmet needs and misinterpreted signals. Sometimes the love is there. You just haven't learned to recognize the way it's being expressed. The masculine is often less verbal, more task-oriented. When a man builds, fixes, provides, or protects, he is expressing affection in the way he was trained to value. When he makes room for you in his world, not just physically, but emotionally, he is extending trust. And when he consistently returns, even without dramatic words, he is revealing a deep and rooted love that may feel quiet, but is unshakable. One of the reasons women overlook this is because of cultural conditioning. Stories, media, and childhood imprinting have shaped an expectation of how love should look. The grand gestures, the emotional speeches, the fairy tale confessions. But these moments, while beautiful, are not the full picture. Real love often looks like patience during an argument, like helping without being asked, like choosing to stay present even when silence fills the room. These moments don't always inspire songs or stories, but they are the pillars of lasting relationships. To recognize this, a woman must shift from being reactional to being reflective. She must pause and ask, what is the energy beneath his actions? What is the emotion behind his silence? What is the consistency behind his choices? Because energy does not lie. If he is distant, you will feel it in the tension in his body. If he is open, you will feel it in the relaxation of his presence. If he is unsure, you will notice it in the way he avoids eye contact. This level of emotional fluency cannot be taught in books. It is developed through practice. By being fully present, by listening with more than your ears, and by allowing your body to become the antenna through which truth is felt. This awareness also prevents unnecessary conflict. So many arguments are rooted not in real problems, but in misread intentions. A woman assumes he doesn't care because he doesn't express love the way she expects. He feels unappreciated because his quiet offerings go unnoticed. Over time, both become frustrated, not because of lack of love, but because of lack of understanding. But the woman who has trained herself to read energy doesn't fall into this trap. She notices his effort even when it's unspoken. She honors his way of loving even when it differs from hers. And in doing so, she creates space for him to grow into more expression because he no longer feels judged or misunderstood. It's like learning a new language. You don't become fluent by demanding the other person speak your tongue. You become fluent by listening, observing, and immersing yourself in their world. In time, you begin to understand the rhythms, the pauses, the emphasis. And suddenly, what once felt foreign becomes familiar. This is what happens when you learn to feel instead of just hear. Love, in its rawest form, doesn't always come dressed in language. Sometimes it comes wrapped in presence. And presence can only be felt when you slow down. In a world obsessed with speed, with progress, with doing, the feminine must reclaim the wisdom of stillness. When you slow down enough to notice, you begin to see the intricate ways a man may already be showing up for you. You see the way he listens, even if he doesn't reply immediately. You see the way he remembers details you didn't realize you shared. You see the way his body relaxes when he's near you. Not because he's trying to impress you, but because he feels safe. That safety is sacred, and it is built not through force, but through awareness. Through the simple, profound act of meeting someone where they are, not where you want them to be. A man does not open because he is pushed. He opens because he is received. And being received means being understood without being analyzed, being felt without being pressured. The more a man senses that his love is recognized, even in its quiet, clumsy, imperfect forms, the more he will want to give, not because he is obligated, but because he is inspired. So pause, look around, feel what is unspoken. Is his presence steady? Is his care consistent? Does he protect you in the small ways? Does he return, even after conflict or distance? These are not minor things. They are signs of a heart that loves differently, not less, just quietly. And in that quiet, something extraordinary is happening. A different kind of love is unfolding. One that doesn't shout, but listens. One that doesn't chase, but stays. One that doesn't overwhelm, but grounds. You won't always see it in his words. But if you learn to see with your heart, you'll recognize it in his energy. And in that recognition, a new depth of connection becomes possible. One that transcends misunderstanding. One that endures. Love is not always loud. It is not always dressed in grand declarations or poetic expressions. Sometimes it speaks in silence, in consistency, in the subtle shifts of energy that can only be felt, not explained. A man falls in love not merely because of what he sees, but because of how he feels when he is in the presence of a woman who knows herself deeply. A woman who is calm in her spirit, who reflects his worth without speaking it, who challenges him with grace and sees not just his present, but his potential. This kind of connection is not built on performance. It is built on presence. And presence, when aligned with truth, becomes magnetic. When a woman lives in emotional congruence, when her words match her energy and her values align with her actions, she invites a man to meet her at the level of his highest self. Men do not fall in love with perfection. They fall in love with peace, with the way they feel more at home in themselves when they are near her, with the way their vision becomes clearer, their purpose more defined, their energy more grounded, and a woman becomes unforgettable not because she demands attention, but because she radiates something few can offer: stillness, discernment, and emotional depth. This is not something that can be rushed or performed. It must be cultivated through quiet self-awareness, emotional discipline, and the inner maturity to allow love to unfold naturally. When a woman becomes the space where a man remembers who he is, not who the world tells him to be, but who he truly is, she becomes not just loved, she becomes essential. Because ultimately, people do not stay where they are endlessly entertained. They stay where they feel profoundly understood, and that understanding, that resonance, begins not in the noise of the world, but in the quiet clarity of one's own soul.